Welcome you all to this special info share. We try to schedule the info shares so that they are not too often and you all don't get bored with the amount of information we pour over you. So we had actually planned to do an info share about our involvement with all kinds of student mobility related initiatives somewhere in spring, but then a couple of weeks ago there was a big meeting with a lot of representatives of European universities in which the Commission suggested that they should all connect to eduGAIN, and that triggered us to inform the GA about that and hopefully prepare the NRENs a bit to maybe an influx of universities that want to connect to your identity federations. I announced that over the GA list, and Alberto Perez of Red Iris asked if we could do an info share so that GA representatives could understand a little bit better what was happening, what our plans are in that area, etc. So this is the result of that request. We have two speakers today, Licia Florio and Christos Kanalopoulos. They have together pretty much run the technical side of the MyAcademicID project and are also heavily involved in the Successor project. So I think they are very well positioned to give you an insight into what is happening in the student mobility space and what GÉANT's role is in there and what the potential role for the NRENs is. I think with that, I'll hand it over to Licia.
Hello, here Alberto Perez speaking.
Hi, Alberto.
First, thanks a lot for the introduction and for organizing the meeting. And just for additional clarification, in our case, we were worried by two facts. One was that this was not only affecting universities, which usually are using our identity services, but everyone involved in Erasmus+. In the case of Spain, this includes design schools, art schools, conservatories, and a lot of institutes. All of them are eligible, but many of them are not members of Red Iris, so they would have to register to Red Iris first and then become users of our CIR Digital Identity Federation and then become users of eduGAIN. And this could be an important influx and a big difference. We have some specific rules for institutes, secondary schools, I mean. So for us, it can have a big operational impact in the number of requests and the way that we are going to handle this with the regions and the education ministries of the regions and so forth. So it was not only the idea of having universities. And the second thing I wanted to highlight is that we were told that at some moment in time, it would be necessary to do Erasmus Plus in digital form using digital services like MyAcademicID, and that this could become compulsory. So this makes a big difference. If this is an opportunity, it's very good. If it's compulsory, it's a big responsibility because this is an ongoing project that then requires things to be done on time. So we are uncertain about the scope of the obligations and how relevant this is. So it's for sure something to be happy about because it's a usage opportunity for eduGAIN and promotion and more value provided. But then we are worried about who will use it and when and with which consequences. So this was what triggered in my case to ask for information and to ask whether others would have these similar kind of questions. So thanks a lot for organizing. I hope that we can get some answers, and if not now, work together to get them as the information comes along. Thanks a lot, class.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alberto, for that clarification. And yes, we have actually already had a number of meetings also with representatives of the identity federations, and some of the issues you mentioned have definitely come up in those discussions. And Christos will present some of the possibilities that we foresee. But as you point out, that is very much what we would like to put forward as discussion material, if that is an approach that you think makes sense. So thanks very much for leading us to that path.
So actually, this is a very good introduction from Alberto, because we will be covering some of these things. And hopefully we will clarify things, because we realize that some of the communication that have gone out, not necessarily on the GÉANT side, but on the Commission side of the from the Erasmus national agencies, maybe they were also confused, have not really helped to get things in order. So first of all, we want to provide a little bit of background, because at least for me, when I started to work with Erasmus, I was completely surprised about the scale of operations that they have. First of all, I thought that the Erasmus program was only in the EU, at least at my time. This used to be the case, and there were other programs. Well, it turns out that it is pretty much in EU. You see, it's pretty much all color, but it also includes the rest of the world. So this was the first thing that for me was like enlightening. And the scale is indeed pretty big. There are, the Erasmus Plus is one of the funding that, of the programs that provides funding to support both the universities as well as the students to go abroad. And in addition to that, also provides support for the whole workflow and services that are being created. I want to note that until recently, and this is really until a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, the whole program, although it had increased in size in terms of institutions that participate, in terms of students that participate, and as Alberto said very well, it encompasses, to my surprise, military academies, conservatories, conservatoriums, sorry, includes also some really specialized schools, which are not necessarily high schools. So there is a whole spectrum, including sport academies that are part of this program. So all this program used to be very much paper-based. If you wanted to apply as a student, you will go there, fill in a form, present the form, get the stamp, go to another place, wait for the response, etc., etc. At some point, the Commission decided to look at ways to digitize this program, and there have been other investments being made. Now, the Erasmus Plus has been folded under the European Student Card Initiative, which, to make things even more confusing, it's not about the student card necessarily. It's really an initiative that will enable every student to easily identify and register themselves electronically at a higher institution within Europe or abroad, and then to go abroad for their studies. So the old plan under the old vision, the European Student Card, is that at some point, everything, the whole process will be all done electronically, both for students to apply for grants, as well as for institutions to transfer the grants after the student has completed their study abroad. So the European Student Card Initiative has two main pillars. One is the digitalization aspect and the streamline of the student mobility paperwork. Let's call it paperwork, but all this paperwork will become electronic. And the other one is to roll out the European Student Card and the European Student Identifier. And we will get more into the European Student Identifier. We are not going to go over the student card in this webinar because it's something that is totally outside our control and it's already confusing enough. So it's best if other entities will manage that in whatever form or shape is convenient for them. But what is important for this webinar, and Alberto, I think, touched and alluded to this, is that the European Student Card has got a timeline. And the idea is that by 2021, to manage the online learning agreements, so online, there is an application that's called Online Learning Agreement, and OLA in short. And this is something that students will have to sign in the moment in which they request to go abroad. By 2022, the plan is to manage the interinstitutional agreements, so the agreements between universities, whereby each university agrees based on the budget that they have, on how many students they can send abroad, to which countries, and how many students they can receive at their university. And by 2023, the all nomination and acceptance and transcript, basically everything will be all electronic. So if you look at the timelines and the time that is required to implement everything, there is time, but there isn't not a lot of time at the end of the day. So where does MyAcademicID comes in? MyAcademicID comes in to support, to really implement, to provide support for the digital identity, to enable students, basically to go on mobility, and in this way to implement the European Student Card initiative vision, that is the digital aspect and the streamline processes. There are two main units within the European Commissions that are involved into this. One is DG AC, that's it's basically the unit that coordinates the education, the youth, sport programs. And they are the ones that are funding the Erasmus Plus program. And this is really about supporting the e-services that are needed for Erasmus students to go abroad for student mobility, as well as to manage the grants, the application, register the university. So they take care of all this part, and they are the ones that set out the timelines. The new program, by the way, is under preparation, so the new funding is going to be allocated very soon, and this will start in 2021. And the idea is really to have more budget available to support education and mobility. The other part is something that I believe you are all familiar with somehow, the Connecting Europe facility part, which even if it's under DigiConnect, this is the part of the EC that has funded EADAS. And this is important because the CEF part is now supporting and funding all the e-identity aspect and the core platform to enable student mobility to go digital, basically to support all this electronic authentication online. So what is the problem that we were faced when we started with MyAcademicID? If you follow a paper process, of course, you get a letter from your university with the logo, with the signature. It's easy for whoever receives this to determine who you are as a student and what your university is. However, with the services becoming digital, we still need to have this type of information. Who is going on mobility? What is the university the student comes from? When we started to look at this, so obviously there are things that come to mind. eduGAIN is already there. eduGAIN is in fact providing the infrastructure for students to use their home identity, the home institution identity, to access the range of online services that are available via eduGAIN. But obviously, because MyAcademicID is a project funded under the CEF calls, EADAS was very much in scope. And also, I want to stress that EADAS has always been on our radar for eduGAIN. There have been there has been work done prior to this project within the eduGAIN group where we try to get really in touch with EADAS, with those that were determined the strategy, the roadmaps, etc. It was always a moving target. The moment that we got close to them, somehow the people changed and we didn't have any contact anymore and we have to restart all over again. So this project gave us really the opportunity to be able to have a context, a framework to engage with the Commission and with the right players at that level. In addition, some other work was done prior to this project via the European Student Card project, the Erasmus Without Paper. So they all built the digital services or components that we were looking at, and we were looking at what to reuse basically. So where did we start with MyAcademicID? First, we thought, let's start very clearly. What are the student mobility use cases? What is needed here? Clearly, there were many parties together and everybody had a slightly different vision on what was needed. Then how do we agree on a unique way to identify students when they go from University A to University B? And this is where the European Student Identifier comes also into place. How can we design an architecture that allows for a single interface for students, so give a consistent user experience, the same experience the users that are now accessing the identity federations and the services via that are already used to. And then we thought, okay, let's start and build the first bridges and building block to connect finally EADAS and eduGAIN, so that students that have also an EAD enabled EADAS can also benefit from that and they can connect to services. And then the implementation phase started. And this is where I'm gonna hand over to Christos and he will go into details. And actually I'm trying to give control to Christos on my screen even. Let's see if this works.
Thank you, Licia. So let's see. It works. So in the context of the MyAcademicID, we tried to be very specific about what we want to enable. What would be our first goal, let's say phase one of implementing the vision that Licia described. And in that project, basically, the idea was that let's focus on the enabling services that make student mobility happen. In the context of Erasmus+, effectively, these are the online learning agreement tool, the Erasmus dashboard, the Erasmus app, but also a secondary application which is PhD Hub, not directly related with mobility, but it is part of the Erasmus Plus family of services. So the context is this: how we can enable a student from a given higher education institution to be able to follow a digitized version of the student mobility process, where the student can initiate the process locally at the international transfer office of the higher education institution, but then continue this process through the online services that are provided by the European University Foundation in the context of the Erasmus Plus program. So these services are services developed for the Commission by the European University Foundation in collaboration with a number of universities. So for us, for MyAcademicID, the problem was not how to develop the services. The services were already being developed in different programs, but the context was how to enable the students to be able to access the services. And this means that the student will be able to go to the online learning agreement service, identify themselves to that service, then make the application. The application should then be transferred by the service to the higher education institution for approval. After approval, it should be transferred to the receiving higher education institution where the user wants actually to go again for approval. After approval, the student is able to go in the mobility process. Throughout the process, the student will take a number of courses abroad, and student records need to flow from the sending higher education institution to the receiving one and back. And throughout this whole process, the student needs to be identified consistently So when they access the online agreement, the student is identifying themselves. When the records are transferred, the system that is being built needs also to identify that this is exactly the same user that made the application on the online learning agreement. This is the use case. This is what we wanted to enable as phase one in MyAcademicID. So Liz already spoke about the three pillars within MyAcademicID within this. These are the European Student Card, eduGAIN, and EIDAS. And the first thing that we had to do is actually try to see how these things fit together. I mean, are they can they work together? Are they complementary or not? What is the nature of these infrastructures? And what we realized after a lot of discussion was that there is a lot of complementarity here. There is a continuum if we consider that with the European Student Card, effectively the students can identify themselves with physical presence by presenting the card to various services that require such physical presence of the student, such as libraries, such as access to cinemas, even for example, getting a student discount, etc. But while moving to the online world, where we need to be able to bind the digital persona of this person, of the student, with a physical one, we need authentication. And this is where we cannot use the student card as such anymore. And this is where it becomes interesting, because we have already the national identity federations in place where the students can authenticate themselves and can access services online based on that authentication. And not that only, actually, the students who can have more important information that this student is coming from that higher education institution. So now we bring also the academic aspect, academic attribute into play. So the student can not only just identify themselves, authenticate themselves, but we know also from which institution the user comes from. We may even get more information, like what is the student's identifier, what is the user affiliation, that indeed it is a student. And then we go and build on top of that with EIDAS. And EIDAS, I assume that most of you are already aware of what it is. But here we're talking about specifically about the EIDAS interoperability framework, which allows effectively each country, each European member state, and their national EIDs to be able to interoperate at the European level, promising actually access to EIDs that can be used online for millions of European citizens in the future. This is being rolled out as we speak. The infrastructure is already there. The rollout to actual citizens is in progress. Some countries are far ahead from others, but this is happening. So we see this complementarity in terms of level of assurance. We go from European Student Card identification to academic credential, academic authentication, which is a high level of assurance, and then to citizen authentication with national EIDs, which is a much higher level of assurance. But also we see continuum in terms of inclusivity. European Student Cards is really about the students and the properties of student. Authentication through the National Federation involves students, researchers, faculty, increases the context. And then we go to EIDAS, citizens. Basically, now everyone can have a digital persona through which they can authenticate and identify themselves. So there is a nice continuum that actually allow us to build a framework that will enable student mobility in the future. So we have on the one hand EIDAS, EIDAS identifies natural persons. On the other hand, we have eduGAIN that has the student attribute, and we want to merge these two things in one. If we go back a bit to what Alicia was presenting before, the context that we're operating is Erasmus+, enabling student mobility within Erasmus+. And there, Alicia mentioned that we have 82 countries across the world, 5,700 institutions only within Europe, and 2 million students actually participate in these student mobility programs almost every year. With click twice. With eduGAIN, we already have an international infrastructure in place. 70 identity federations, again across the world, cover pretty much of the globe right now. Of course, the areas that still are missing. We account 4,091 identity providers in all these regions and more than 3,000 service providers. So this is truly a global infrastructure, which actually fits very nicely if you think about with the international nature of the Erasmus program. And then we have EIDAS, which is, as I said, this is being rolled out as we speak. It is already in 97 countries, 15 out of which have notified the services, meaning that actually they have agreed to be able to interchange EIDs with the other services in the production environments. So this is happening right now, right? But the reality is that we have a number of, let's say, networks, a network of the Erasmus Plus program of higher education institutions that need to interchange students, have a network of identity providers within our own federations and eduGAIN that allow the exchange of attributes authentication of students, and then a network within Europe now that enables citizens to authenticate and prove their identities online. So what we are doing in MyAcademicID is basically we're trying to marry these things together and enable the use cases that I described before. So now you see this diagram. Basically, this builds upon the simple diagram that I showed you a few moments ago, adding a few new components, the new components that enable this access. So the first thing that we did is connect these services in particular that enable student mobility, connect them and make it possible for users that want to access them to authenticate at the higher education institutions they're coming from. And of course, it's natural to do it through the National Identity Federations and eduGAIN. In order to be able to facilitate this process, as I said, we need to be able to have students to be able to access the services, authenticate themselves, transfer attributes, but at the same time, student records will be transported outside of our infrastructure of our identity federations between the higher education institutions, and these activities, they need to be able to identify the user in the same way. This is what led us actually to the introduction of a new attribute, of a new concept, which is the European Student Identifier. Actually, the new concept is not really a new concept. This is a concept that was pioneered initially by the European Student Card Initiative, where basically in the rollout of the Euro Student Card, effectively all students were getting one European student identifier. Now, within the context of MyAcademicID, we took this concept and we tried to see how we can operationalize this, how we can make this happen within the higher education institutions in a way that it is future-proof and in a way that it is deployable. One of the key problems that we faced was that the initial European Student Identifier, as defined by the European Student Card Initiative, was relying on the identifiers that the Commission was issuing to organizations when they were registering for funding purposes, to submit proposals. And that mechanism, although it might sound okay, this makes sense because almost all higher institutions are registered and they do get this identifier. The reality was that this was not built for a persistent identification of organizations. And what happened is that last year, effectively, the Commission decided to change that, to remove the infrastructure behind that identifier and replace it with something else, which, as you can imagine, effectively broke the whole concept of the European Identifier. So in the context of MyAcademicID and in collaboration with the partners from EUF, from the universities, and the NRENs and the national federations, we basically designed a new specification that is built around the standards and technologies that we are using with the federations, around the stack schema for expressing attributes about the stack home organization, that we express which organization the student belongs to, and marrying it with a local identifier that the student has within that higher education institution. This European Student Identifier effectively enables the ability to authenticate access one of the services, the online learning agreement, for example. The student submits the application, the ESI is registered with the application, and then when the student records are transferred, which includes the ESI of the student, these two things can be married together, can come together. So I will talk a bit more about how this happened in the next slides, but now with the infrastructure, we're enabling basically the higher education institutions that are already IDPs in eduGAIN to be able to authenticate their users and allow them to access the services that support the student mobility process. Now, in the previous slides, you saw that actually the Erasmus Plus program, indeed, it is a superset. It includes much more higher education institutions than what we have in our federations. So this is a question about sustainability, inclusivity also, and of course, this is something that the Commission cannot just leave aside. We need, and the Commission needs to be able to enable all students to be able to have a chance to be part of the student mobility program. This is where the collaboration with EIDAS and the integration with EIDAS comes in, because the vision is again to use the citizen IDs as they are going to be widely deployed in a few years. Every European citizen will be having an EID that will be interoperable, compatible, at least across Europe, to be able to use these EIDs to be able to authenticate themselves, and then on top of them to add the academic attributes that are missing so that the students can authenticate and enable themselves throughout this process. So in the context of MyAcademicID, we built two services. One is the MyAcademicID Identity and Access Management Platform, which enables the connection of the enabling services for the student mobility to be able to utilize and authenticate at the identity providers and the higher education institutions within eduGAIN International Federations, and the EIDAS to eduGAIN bridge, which is a bridge that enables services from eduGAIN, and in this case in particular the Erasmus services, to be able to authenticate the users with the national EIDs through EIDAS. So effectively what this does, it's a bridge, interoperability bridge between the EIDAS infrastructure and eduGAIN, the National Federation as we know them today. This is something that we have been pursuing for many years, as Alicia said a few minutes ago, to make this happen with the EIDAS cooperation network, with the Commission. Through this project, finally we found the right context to be able to build upon that. And now this is also operational. This is operated by the Swedish Research Council, SUNET. At this phase, it is connected behind the Swedish node, EIDAS node. So basically, it looks like a Swedish service. This is as long as we're discussing with the EIDAS cooperation network and with Digit to see how we can have a better integration between eduGAIN and EIDAS at the top level, so that we don't have to connect through one given country, because this does have also some user experience issues, but rather to give seamless access to users who want to access services in the National Federation eduGAIN to be able to authenticate with the national IDs across Europe. So the timeline, how this has happened. So this is what we wanted to achieve in MyAcademicIDs. After a number of months in the project, in May 2020, we basically came with the initial construct of the student identifier and this architecture, and we started the consultation with the federation operators. In September, we were ready actually, we managed to publish the specification of the European student identifier, which was broadly announced to many higher education institutions through the Commission and through the national agencies that support the international transfers. In October, the event that Klaas mentioned took place, and actually, to be honest, we were not fully prepared for that. We didn't know exactly the magnitude of that event. So the online learning agreement version 3 was launched with academic logins enabled. And the online event that this was announced basically had around 2,000 participants all of them being either representatives from national agencies that are involved in student mobility, or from the people who are actually participating in the international transfer desks at higher education institutions. So all the people involved basically were there to hear from the Commission saying that OLA based thing is happening, academic logins are enabled, and everybody will have to go through this process when they want to follow the digitalized version of the student mobility. At the same time, also in October, a set of national workshops took place to further mobilize the community around the new online agreement and the new way of identifying users through the academic institutions and through the infrastructure. In November, we introduced the EIDAS login as an option for users to authenticate. So in October, effectively, the users were prompted with the familiar discovery page that you all know, where they could select their institution. In November, we also enabled there to be able to select EIDAS as one of the options, and they can now log in to one of the 15 countries which have notified their EID schemes. And this brings us to December, right now. So after the online learning agreement, which was the first service, now the second service, the Erasmus Plus app, this is a mobile application, is entering the QA phase from the Commission side. We're not involved in that rollout, but this basically is meant to be launched very soon. So right now it is in its final stages. And this, we see that it will basically drive also the level of adoption a few levels higher. So right now, after effectively being almost 1.5 months in operation, we have some numbers to see, and I have to say that these are very interesting. So first of all, from mid-October that the platform was opened until November, end of November, almost 3,700 students were registered, went through this process to register and be part of the online learning agreement tool. And all this enabled through logins through the national federation. Basically, we analyze the data. We have logins from 554 identity providers already within just 1.5 months. And they're coming from 38 countries. So as you see here, you can see effectively higher education institutions from the majority of the countries in Europe. Of course, Germany and France are outstanding with the number of institutions that are sending students. In this graph, what you see is not the number of students, it's the number of identity providers from which students are authenticating. So this is very much spread across Europe. And also, I would like to point out that this goes beyond Europe to also emphasize the international character of the Erasmus Plus program. So we have identity providers from Brazil, 5 institutions from Brazil, from Canada, from China, from Ecuador, from India, and from Singapore. These are students from these institutions have already applied for this service to be part of the student mobility. So to dig a bit better a bit more in some interesting data, we're trying to see also what are we doing also in terms of attribute release. This is, I mean, many of you have heard that this is one of the big problems that services are facing in the context of the federations. One of the most important attributes, at least in the context of student mobility, is the affiliation. It says, I mean, is this a person a student, or is member faculty, or this person is? And actually, the results are very interesting. Out of the 554 identity providers, 434 already released this attribute. So this is already a stepping stone on top of which we can work on. Let me say here the following: that in this phase of rolling out MyAcademicID, we request in the protocols that we're using, the SAML protocol that we're using, a number of attributes, but effectively, even if no attributes are released by the identity provider, the only attribute that we really need is something to identify me, that I'm a different user from class, for example. If it even don't release anything else, we allow still the user to register. It's very liberal at this point. So EPSA, class rights, EPSA stands for Education Scoped Affiliation. This is the affiliation of the user with the institution. So we're doing very well in this regard, and this has been one of the main problems that many services have been having in getting this attribute from identity providers. Next interesting attribute is the FACOM organization. This is the organization that the student is coming from. This is a not so commonly used attribute in the national federations, but already 84 identity providers are releasing this. And this is happening without doing any interesting rollout and actually trying to do campaign to get this from the identity providers. Keep in mind though that these two attributes are not new things for identity providers. These are attributes that all identity providers already have in their identity management system. It is a matter of attribute release policy whether they will be making this available or not. To go a bit further, let's see about this new identifier, this European identifier. Lisa mentioned that also during these communications from the Commission, the European identifier was very much highlighted. It was something that the national agencies cared about and the higher education institution representatives cared about. And already we're receiving a number of requests and questions from identity provider operators asking us how they're going to enable this. So on the platform today, we have already 3 identity providers who are releasing ESI. I mean, we have registered users from these identity providers with students who have ESI. I know for a fact there is a handful also more of identity providers that today have configured the systems for ESI. And this is the area that we'll be focusing on in the next year or so in the context of MyAcademicID. We'll come to this in a few moments. And the last bit of interesting information is that after enabling eIDAS authentication, you have only one user who actually used the eIDAS credentials to authenticate. So the fact that this happened also is very promising. We do expect that in the months or year to come, we see more and more users taking advantage of the national eIDs. Hopefully they will be. So this is the current state of affairs. This is where we are right now. We are in production, as I said, from mid-October, and now I hand this over back to Licia.
Yes. So just I'm looking also a bit at the time, so we want to give plenty of time for you to ask questions. The project, MyAcademicID, ends at the end of December this year. Actually, it was supposed to finish earlier. We got an extension, so we could do more work. But the important part is that all the work that we are doing in MyAcademicID is meant to remain. Basically, MyAcademicID is transforming in the core platform to enable student mobility. And you see the next timelines here. So more services are going to be connected to the platform. In January 2021, the Erasmus app will be launched. Again, we don't control these timelines. This is the Commission and the European University Foundation that is managing the services, but also works with the Commission on the timelines. In March 2021, the new online learning agreement template comes to effect. And this is really something very specific. I mean, there is no need to go very much in detail here, but students will be using, we'll have to use this new form. And this is really fresh from the press. In August 2021, the ESI will be mandatory to access Erasmus services, which will push the institutions a lot because they will have to have this identifier in place, and they have to be able to release, and they have to be able to connect. And this is what brings us, and this, I think that this is probably what many of you are most interested in. What's the role for the NRENs and eduGAIN as a whole? Is this a challenge, an opportunity? What's in scope for you? So let me start by saying that all the technical components are in place. So the infrastructure is there. Obviously, there will be more services connected. We can polish the interfaces. We can polish things. We can make things better. But at this point in time, the roads have been built. The MyAcademicID is bringing together EADAS, the eduGAIN, Erasmus Plus services, other services that are in scope for the European Student Card Initiative, the ESCI. So all is in place. What is important now is how to make sure that institutions can access to all this to be able to participate to Erasmus. And I would like just to quickly go over the numbers again, because I think the numbers are interesting. So Erasmus is a global initiative. You see the number of institutions, 8,700. Also, these numbers are not set in stone because every year new institutions can join, can drop. For instance, Switzerland is now not participating, but they will be in 2021. So there will be more institutions there. Of these institutions, we got this number from the Commission. Well, let's say close to 6,000 are in Europe. If we look at eduGAIN numbers, you see that the number of institutions is in any case lower, 4,000, more than 4,000 institutions are in eduGAIN globally. And on this already, as you can see, as Christos says, eduGAIN is a subset effectively of the institution. And please note that I put 5,700 institutions in Erasmus, not all higher education institutions. And this is an important factor, and we will get back to that. So bottom line, what the numbers show to us, I mean, there are some approximations, but the order of is right, that we have more than about 2,500 institutions that are not in eduGAIN and that we have to cater for. And now this is what we would like to present you, the plan, how we are going to do this, and I'll hand over to Christos again.
So now we are in the context of the ESCI project, which is the successor of MyAcademicID. And within this context, one of the goals that the Commission has set, because what Lisa presented with the numbers was very well known, the Commission was very much positioning the idea of having an identity provider of last resort at the European level, that basically could cater, could support all those institutions that are not eligible, cannot have the users to access the services of the academic institutions. So in the context of ESCI, we tried to see how this can be done in a way that is feasible. Actually, having such a service at the European level is not feasible. I mean, I've been discussing with many federations, with new federations with experiences in running such services, and such a solution is not sustainable. So what we try to do is we try to come up with a process, with a solution that actually will make sure that we involve the NRENs and the national federations in this discussion and try to investigate possibilities, opportunities for new higher education institutions to join the federation if that's possible, but also to cover for those cases where this is not feasible. This is not feasible for reasons where, for example, that institutions are not part of the constituency of that NREN. So right now, this is work in progress. We are working with in the context of ESCI with the European University Foundation and the partners there, but also in discussions with federation operators on a flow that actually could make this happen in a way that everybody will win out of this. So we try to identify a number of scenarios in which we can find ourselves. The first one being that users from one of the institutions can authenticate to services from eduGAIN. So this is something that can happen. This is the happy scenario. In this case, effectively, what needs to happen is what we described in the timeline before. Proper attribute release by March 2021, and we're almost there with that. So the gap that we need to fill, it's very small. And the university identifier that needs to be available by August 2021. These are the two requirements for the IDPs that are already in the national federations and available in eduGAIN. Now, the second scenario is users, students from higher education institutions that cannot authenticate services in eduGAIN. Oops, what happened? I think Licia is clicking on the mouse. The second scenario is users from higher education that cannot offer your service in the GÉANT. In this case, somehow this is.
So sorry, Christos, it was me. I wanted to unmute in case, because now everything is locked. I'm sorry. I stopped. I don't touch anything anymore. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the sabotage. That's fine. In this second scenario, basically the gameplay is the following. We advise the higher education institution to contact the national federation operator and join the national federation and eduGAIN as the identity provider. And we provide a contact list of where they can find information about the federation operator. If this is done, then go back to scenario 1, make sure that the proper attributes are being released. Scenario 3 is that the higher education institution actually cannot operate an IDP. So, I mean, they are not in the federation, of course, because they don't have an IDP, but they also cannot operate an IDP. And we have heard about many such cases where we have small institutions where they don't have the capacity, the staff to be able to run such an IT service. In these cases, again, the direction is to get in touch with the national federation operator and investigating whether in that country, that federation, there are alternative solutions, either in the form of an IDP of last resort operated by the federation or a hosted IDP service, again operated by the federation. If this is available and can be provided by the federation, this is great. And go back again to scenario 1. I mean, make sure that attribute release is possible from that solution. So, exhausting this, we come to scenario number 4. Now we have a user where it comes from a higher education institution that cannot join the national federation as an IDP. They cannot operate their own IDP, and there is no IDP of last resort or hosted IDP solution in that federation. All right. So this is the most unhappy scenario. This is a scenario where basically the federation or NRN cannot assist that institution, and we need to find a solution around it. So here is what we're thinking in this regard. First of all, we have ruled out the scenario of running an identity provider service across Europe, as this is something not sustainable, not scalable in many, not only technical, but also policy, financial ways. This is very difficult. The idea that we have and the approach is to engage with the national agencies. The national agencies that participate in the international transfers are key places here because they are the ones that actually can gather information about which institutions fall under this category. In this case, when they gather this information, they make this information available to us, and then we basically make sure with the federation operators from those countries that actually this is indeed the case. So we double check. Is it indeed a service, yes, a higher institution that cannot be served in any other way? If this is the case, then the operator of the platform will invite the representative of the higher education institution to register on the MyAcademicID platform to do what? To be assigned the role of representative of that institution and to be able to enroll students directly on the MyAcademicID platform. Now, this is a manual process, and the idea is that this will be enabled only for those cases where we have small institutions with just a handful of students that will be going to mobility. So the person will be able to go to fill in a form, invite the students that they already know that they will be going to mobility. The students will be getting an invitation mail. They will register on the platform with their preferred identity provider. In this case, hope that eventually there will be eIDAS. Until citizen IDs are widely acceptable, we support also Google authentications, and this is a requirement in order to have continuity from what used to be the OLA version 2. We're thinking about adding also ORCID as an alternative authentication provider, but always until we have wide coverage of national eIDs to the students. The student enrolls, and then they can go and follow the process. In this way, we will make sure that we engage with the NRENs and the federation operators. We give the opportunities first for the NREN to onboard the members and serve them in that way. If this is not possible, only then this last measure will be activated to be able to support all those cases that cannot be supported in any other way. That's what we're drafting right now. Nothing is set in stone. This is a discussion that's ongoing, but that's the direction that we're heading at right now. And actually, any input or thoughts, ideas of this will be more than welcome. So with this, I think this is the last slide. Thank you very much. And I think this is the time for question discussion.
Yeah, maybe before we, and I get out of this, the presentation mode because I cannot see the screen. In fact, I cannot access anything. So stop share.
No, so thank you both. What I propose is that those of you that want to ask a question, raise your hand in the participant list. In the meanwhile, I saw, or ask them via the chat function, I saw that there was a question coming from this little white island in the EIDAS ocean called Switzerland. Christoph Graaf asked, what's the remit of the European student card? Is it the same as Erasmus+? Licia, can you answer that?
Well, actually, I also double checked that when I saw the question, and to be really sure. So the remit was never 100% agreed on, but the intention was that this European student card, because it was an EC-funded project, starting with that, was really for Europe. Now, whether there is the potential for that to go beyond, possibly, but we should also look who is using that at this point in time. The project was driven by France, and there are the highest number of institutions that are using the European student card are in France. When I looked the last time, I believe I counted 4 in Italy. So it's really a handful of institutions in the rest of Europe. And as I said, every time we speak about this, if my sense, but Christos, correct me if you had a different impression, was that it's very polarized environment. So I try to stay out of these student card discussions.
So the interesting part is that also many now realize that perhaps even the title of the European student card is somehow misleading. Because everybody thinks, yes, because everybody thinks about a student card, while the vision is something digital. So this creates a lot of confusion to many people. And to add on this to this confusion, you have the student card initiative and the project, which are not one and the same thing. So, but yeah, this is the reality. And I think the Commission is trying right now, this is my impression at least, to try to move away from this lock in the student card concept and to really try to embrace the aspect of digital access to services.
I see no hands or questions in the chat. Does that mean that you all agree that this is a good idea, a good approach? Any concerns you may have?
Yeah, I seem to raise my hand. Thank you. I think that the approach is indeed quite good, and it is a great achievement, and it is something that would bring new value to the federation. And the one thing is that we need to, as a community, probably we need to work on the on this scenario 2, if I'm not mistaken, or scenario 3.
I will put that up 1 second. So
no, it's fine. I mean, on the hosted IDP solution. Yeah, so that's scenario 3. On the hosted IDP solution, So the question is, do we have a framework for that? I don't remember offhand if there was. I suppose there was a eduROM as a service initiative, and it should be operational more or less. But whether there was any attempt at the implementation of the hosted IDP on the general level, so that every NRN does not try to reinvent the same thing.
So perhaps it's something to say, something that will be happening in the context of EDCI is basically to catalog available software solutions to build such services. We know already that, for example, that Spain has one and is actually extending this, and that might be interesting also for other countries. We are going in the context of EDCI to also find other similar initiatives, activities, so that we can give tools to NRENs federations that are willing to operate such services themselves. Let me add here also the following, that in many countries also we know that there are eduID initiatives that are happening, which might actually be also another anchor to this problem, right? This all depends on the implementation, of course, for in each country, but these things are now coming together to try to increase inclusivity in terms of student population that can access online services such as the Erasmus service.
Christoph, I think you just need to join the EU. That seems the easiest solution for all of us. But Christoph mentions that there are a number of different remits for the different elements of MyAcademicID, and I think that is very much true. It is, however, not something under our control. So we can do our part of it and hope for the best, I guess.
So perhaps we can add here that we are pushing also from our side to engage in a more close discussion with the various actors in this regard. So we already have a good connection with the Connecting Europe facility and that part of DigiConnect. And now we will start basically interacting with Digit also, because now Digit is the new agency that will be taking over as far as we understand the operations of EIDAS. So this is happening right now, and of course with the EIDAS cooperation network, and this doesn't happen, of course, out of vacuum, right? I mean, we have Leif Johansson from SUNET, who's helping very much on the EIDAS cooperation network side. And we have our own contacts with DigiConnect, trying also to liaise with the various with the DigiConnect itself. So all of these things are coming together. Indeed, it's fragmented space, but at least the nice thing is that we have a context, and now this context is DCSI, MyAcademicID is finishing, through which we will bring these things together.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the work floor, if you want, there is a lot of information exchange and the need and the will to reach an agreement. But a number of these programs, of course, they run multiple years and they usually have a specific target audience, and that still is a bit all over the place in a way.
But just I want to highlight a couple of things, just to be sure that those things don't get missed. So one thing is that the Erasmus Plus program is growing. If we look at the number over the last 10 years, it has exploded. And we believe, I mean, even now with COVID, with everything, you see the number of, I mean, there were how many, 3,000 plus students that try to connect even just in 1 month. So this shows that the numbers are there. I think, so this is one. We cannot control everything, but I think we have now, over the last couple of years, consolidated this collaboration really with EUF, the European University Foundation, and those are the people that are really driving the development of the Erasmus services. And I mean, and we have other 2 years together in the follow-up project that has been approved, which started in September. So we have something in place. And the other thing I want to highlight is about the host IDP. I mean, again, it's not a technical problem. Setting up an IDP, as complex it may be, it has been done and many people know how to do. The point is that who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the support? How is this IDP, because you need one per institution or you need a clever solution, how these IDPs will be able to release the European Student Identifier, and most importantly, how I mean, it's also a business model that comes into place, because there are a number of institutions, as Alberto pointed out at the very beginning, that are not member of the NRENs, and they cannot get only the IDP, because at the moment, with the best of my knowledge, the business model for the majority of the NRENs is that you get the whole package, or you basically don't get anything, kind of. You cannot say, okay, I get the network there, but I get only eduroam here, plus I get the managed IDP. And there are also a number of schools that are involved, private universities, etc. I mean, some countries, bigger countries, have bigger problems, it seems to be. But, and this is what also we wanted to bring to your attention. But these people will be knocking at the doors very soon because they have students, you know, they get money, they get prestige, and they want to participate. And the fact that the whole process goes digital, not to exclude institutions, but actually to make the whole experience better. And we have to, somehow we are exposed to this. And this is really something to consider, for which we don't have an immediate solution here, but we wanted to present this for your consideration, and in any case for information.
Christian, you had a question or remark.
Yeah, well, almost exactly on that point. I was surprised, well, was I surprised? I don't know, about the number of organizations participating in Erasmus, but not using the National Identity Federation, if you want. So there's a huge gap. And of course, the MyAcademicID project cannot deal with that gap. But maybe other project like GÉANT or something can deal better with that. So have you considered any complementary additional work now in GÉANT 3 to better support what's happening on the Erasmus side here? I think I'm just mentioning GÉANT because all GÉANT members are participants in GÉANT, so there could be a real distribution effect that we might want to use. It also addresses a question by Martin Kramers on the chat, by the way. So is it just MyAcademicID? Is there something interesting? Or are there options in GÉANT 3 we can better facilitate to support this Erasmus thing? Because I think for the looking at eduGAIN and National Identity Federations in general, this move by the EC is a great thing, which comes with some challenges.
Yeah, I actually think I'll draw that even a little bit wider than what you just said, Christian. I think this is part of the overall TNI strategy that GÉANT and the GÉANT community have. And in very short, I would say, yes, we are looking at many things that increase the value of being a member of the federation, because that is, I think, the key element here. If it is worth your while, you will do it. And so we have things like in academia, where we add value. We have in the GÉANT 3 project a number of activities to lower the barrier, to make it easier to take part, etc. And I think we have to look in the combination of all these things and reach a reach a level that with, for example, eduroam, we reached much sooner, but that's because it's a much simpler service. It's, you get access. Everybody understands that it's relatively simple. It's yes or no, that's it. The selling eduGAIN and the identity federations is just a bit harder, but I do think we will get there.
Yeah, I hope so. My question is more is the initiative where all GÉANT members can benefit from, or because we are not all participants in MyAcademicID, or whatever project comes next, we are only members of we are only all members of GÉANT4. That was my only point here.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure you see other opportunities even better.
Yeah.
So perhaps something that was not mentioned at all in the presentation, but this couldn't have happened if GÉANT4 was not there, because we're using EduTeams to enable all these things. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to do anything. So already we're using that structure. And let me say also, I mean, I mentioned many times that we're talking with federation operators. This is not happening out of context. It's happening within the context of GÉANT4.3, right? If we didn't have those fora, we wouldn't be able to have these consultations. Now that things are crystallizing of the path forward, we need, I think I agree with you, Christian, that we need to think what are the actual initiatives that we need to take in the context of GÉANT4.3 to support these actions. And we need to do more in this regard.
But
in several different areas.
This is something that we should also keep in mind, because this is just the beginning. It's the end of MyAcademicID project, but this thing will remain there. The numbers will remain there. And we want to bring more institutions that are eligible into your federation. We want to support, because this is a good use case and they understand that. There are also other institutions that maybe different NRENs may decide to take a different approach. Maybe you can say, okay, but I let them in, I'll discuss, I don't know, you know, it needs a conversation. GÉANT4, GÉANT5 preparation will start next year. So this is, I believe, there is an opportunity for us to think how we want to continue to get ourselves together.
Maarten, Christian alluded to what you were writing, but he also asked, will there be a communication package available for federation operators and or IDPs?
Maarten, you will be part of that, because you are part of the group that is.
Okay.
So yes, Maarten, you will provide communication package.
No, but
Thank you.
look, this is something important, because you know how things happen. The ESCI has these webinars, especially now that many things are online, more people participate. So you get really a lot of people. Then those are universities, national Erasmus agencies, officers, and what do they go? So they ask us, so what should we do? And then what we tell them, contact your NRENs. Here is the list. If you don't know who they are, here are the names. You still cannot find the name, tell us and we will put you in touch. So, and you have to be prepared when this comes, because then you know that, you know what to say. And we are working on this more information for you to have to start with, and then for you to customize, because you know what works better.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
I try to keep track of the order, but I have to watch both the chat and the participant list. But I think Artur Binchevsky was the next one in line.
Okay, thank you, Klaas. I have some technical question, because for the success of this increasing of the number of institutions to the eduGAIN IDP is how fast they are able to integrate the IDP systems with eduGAIN. And in this way, yes, I have a question that how we are able to improve this kind of the integration. It means that many protocols, maybe to make some automatic system for the validation of such integration, yes. And could you tell me, yes, how it could look in the future?
Let me, I mean, where I stand, perhaps I'm mistaken, but I think if an IDP manages to get to the national federation, then getting to eduGAIN is a small leap forward. So the barriers that I see is usually to connect to the Identity Federation and then to make it available in eduGAIN. So it's this first step usually where institutions are stumbling and wasting a lot of time to try to get things right. Joining a federation again is another discussion, but for IDPs, I think it is really the local national federation step. And I do agree with you that right now setting up an identity provider is not the simplest thing. It's not only a technical problem, it's also how to integrate with your directory services, etc. But there is a lot of experience in our community, and I think this is something that we need to leverage upon. There are many different approaches that have been applied, and perhaps this is something that we need to be sharing among each other.
Yeah, my question is that I'm afraid that at this moment, as this kind of institutions, universities would like to join, yes, and we have a quite limited resources in the NRENs, which are able to follow that, yes, that we will be possible a bottleneck for that reason. And here is depends how we are able to prepare some kind of the automatic mechanism to validation and to help of them, yes, regarding this integration. It was the goal of my question.
Yeah, this is a very good point. And actually, this is also one of the reasons why many universities now buy things from Microsoft and others, because at least there is the feeling that they get supported there. I mean, for sure there is some support, but then there are other problems that brings. But yeah, there is discussion ongoing in the eduGAIN team also. And I don't know if David is there. I see Tomasz is there for sure. So we have to think a bit more how to do, and if we can provide a solution that will satisfy different federations, because that's also the other aspect, and as well as integrate with the local environments.
Pavel writes that he sees a problem with the new European Student Identifier attribute, because it's a compilation of other attributes, and it will be a problem to get existing IDPs to implement it. Can you comment to that, Christos?
So yes, this is interesting. What I have seen, at least from the IDPs that have been contacting me, is that apart from a couple of clarifications, they can do it. I have not heard of any showstoppers regarding doing this. Now, if you ask me about the ESCI, I think it's a necessary evil, right? It is not what I would have liked to be there, but we have to have something, and we have to have something that is globally unique and persistent. So the options out there of what we could do were very limited. And usually discussions, because we spent months discussing what this ESCI should look like, literally almost a year. I mean, the discussions were easily going towards, let's create something new that will be available in 3, 4, 5 years. But we need a solution. We need to enable this process August 2021. So we have to make compromises, and we have really to work with what we had at hand. Having said this, let me say the following. As part of the design is that the university identifier is not something static. Part of the design is the ability for a student to be able to have multiple identifiers and to roll over to new type of identifiers. Exactly because we also were not excited about the ESCI as it stands right now. And we do foresee that new developments in the years to come might introduce us with better solutions. So that's why we built in the concept of identity linking and having multiple identifiers that actually a student might have throughout the use of the services, just to cater for these cases. But right now, at least the people involved, and we involved a lot of people from many federations, it was the best thing we could come up with the tools that we had at hand.
Also, Christos, maybe also important to say that we could have come up with something totally new, maybe better, but we felt that that will never, it will take a long time to populate that. And in the Erasmus community, SHAC, to our surprise, was widely used for other reasons as well. So many universities were using that, I believe, for the Erasmus Without Paper. So, and then we thought, okay, if many of them are familiar and SHAC is something already known, the chances are that many other universities have populated that. And that's why we went for that.
My guess is that a certain Victoriano Girold is behind that happening there, as a big fan of SHAC. But yes, so
Miro has his
I'm in control, Licia, no worries. I just wanted to say that Christoph also put some text around the eduID initiatives that are in Switzerland and Netherlands and Sweden and others happening, and that is an interesting element to look at, well, all seem to agree. And then I see a hand from Miro. Miro, what did you want to say?
Yes, thanks. Hello, everyone. And actually, I wanted to continue on what Christos has said. As a person that has actually, as a federation that has already implemented ESCI for all our IDPs, so for us, this is done work. Technically, guys, it is really not a big deal, especially if you have a reliable student management systems. The issue here is not to implement it technically. The problem in coming years will be to maintain its information quality. So to make sure that University X really provides the student identifier, at least which is unique identifiable data for per person per university. That is the minimum for ESI. So I don't see this as a technical challenge. I think our community is able to do it. Our IDPs are strong enough to do it, not a big issue, especially by the end of August. But it might be an issue coming from them that what on earth is the content of this ESI? Are they able to identify it and put it in place? I mean, information challenge is bigger than the technical one. And that's up to the student management systems. So if your IDPs are without that, if the faculties doesn't have it, then they are probably doomed. And Erasmus Without Paper is just a dream for them.
Yeah,
my 5 cents.
Yeah, so you see a role of the federation operator in helping the IDPs to implement ESI?
Technically, yes, probably, because I presume we know how to do it, or every federation operator should understand what it means to add an attribute to a directory or to an IDP functionality, but that is the technical end. For the rest, they should probably seek help. I don't know where, but either, I mean, from the local agencies that maintain the international relationships, from the institutions that cover that part of the academic IT support. I don't know how much NRENs are involved. I do know local situation in here, but I do not know if your NREN is really going into helping faculties or universities to set up student management systems.
Can I mention something?
Yeah, go on, Christos.
That's very good, because also we have here a little bit of tunnel vision, because we see only our part of the story, but there is a much bigger part. Part of this digitization process is also about making possible to exchange records across higher education institutions. We are not involved in these discussions at all right now, at least, but this is happening. So this will be a big challenge for the IT services within the higher education institutions, how to make it such. So they have great challenges ahead of them, and the ESI, the attribute, I think it's just a very small part of the biggest set of challenges that they will have to face. Right? I just want to share also this thing.
We are coming towards the end of this session. I think I'll change the order of the last two people that raised their hands and let Maarten go first, and then I'll let our eduGAIN service owner Davide say the final words.
Yeah, thank you, Klaas. Yeah, it was the other question I also put in the chat, and that is given that there is quite an urgency, given that it's already well, March and June or August that the ESI has to be provided. How will the institutions, as far as you know, we know, are being communicated that they actually there is an urgency for them? Is it done via national agencies that Lucia knows, for instance? Because I'm still a little bit puzzled how that information will flow, that the institutions themselves actually know they have to do something.
Well, I don't think I can give you a 100% accurate answer. What we know, because I'm not, we are not on the institution side. So what we know is that there is a network that is coordinated via the Commission, via these Erasmus agencies, and via the institutions. There are some specific timelines. First of all, you have to register your institution to participate to Erasmus+. Then there is some, they will review the criteria, I don't know how, then you get assigned a budget, your university can add to that. So there is all this thing that happens in some way. And there are timelines. If you want to get the grants, then you'll have to register your university within a certain date. And I understand that university level, there is a team that is dedicated to this. What was our understanding is that the team that deals with all this is detached completely from the team that manages the IDPs. Or maybe completely in most of the cases. There are cases where they know each other, they talk to each other and things work well. And actually Davide has some good stories there. So what we try to understand is to give the Commission the right information so they can promote this. I don't know, webinar, I don't know other channels. I mean, I'm not sure. And hopefully everything is in place, but still when we had the webinar, I mean, you should have seen the questions that we got about anything and everything from these people. So there is a lot to do about communication to streamline things.
Davide, some final wise words?
Well, that will be difficult, but so no pressure. Thank you, Klaas. But if I can add something about the ESI, I would say that currently the main concern of at least the institutions with which I've spoken with is not exactly how, well, not at all how to produce it, but more than anything, what to do to consume it in the rightful way. So what do I have to do with the ESI of the incoming students, not how do I produce the ESI for the outgoing students? Because that is less of a concern, if I can say that. And then I would like to, I raised my hand basically to add some information for Arthur from Poznan, from PSNC. So about what are we doing and if we can do something to ease the deployment and the installation, configuration and deployment of IDPs in the institutions and the organizations. So very briefly, what I want to say is that in the past, we have investigated IDP as a services, for example, service managed centrally and for example, at the GÉANT level. We did come to the conclusion that that wasn't really a good idea, mainly for the reasons that Christos listed for an IDP of last resort, centrally run by GÉANT for the all Europe. More or less, we are in the same lot, and we can leverage some IDP as a service services set up by NRENs here and there in the EU, and not just in the EU, but at the end of the day, for the most of the higher education and research institution, what would really help is more, in my opinion, at least, and in my experience, training and a good set of tools. That, for example, is the same approach that In Common is using with the tier program in the past and with the Trusted Access platform now, which is basically based on building a set of Docker images and a set of Ansible playbooks that can be used to ease the installation and deployment of complex tools like IDPs. But then, when it comes to the integration with between the IDP and the local system of record, then you need someone inside the organization that is trained and dedicated to do so. So this is something that we cannot really get rid of, and something on which we need to invest. This is my point of view.
Thank you, Davide, and I think you lift up well to the pressure I put on you. We are by now more than 5 minutes over the allotted time, so I want to say it doesn't stop here. We are, of course, available for further discussion. There are already a couple of follow-up actions, so you will hear more from us, and we'd like to hear more from you as well. Concerns, tips, brilliant ideas are always welcome. But for today, I want to thank Christos and Licia for their presentation, and thank all of you for your active participation in this this InfoShare, and I hope it was useful.